Okay, so here we go. I'm going to be talking about um, July 2020 and looking at some charts, some predictions of a few countries. I have a few that I'm going to be looking at actually, and just kind of going over some things, some sort of main issues that are happening now with a few important countries. I mean, they're all important, but larger countries that have some things in the news. Of course, I live in the USA, and so USA, and then also India. There's quite a lot going on in India, especially like with their standoff with China, and then also China. There's some big stuff happening in China as well. I actually have to add this: new swine flu discovered today. Woohoo! So this upcoming month is going to have a lot of stuff going on. And again, my apologies because I don't live in these other countries, but watching the news, I can see and get a strong feeling and feel for what's happening relative to these things. Now, this double chart, this is the chart of the country, and this is the current transits. Okay, so I'll start with India. Actually, you'll see this is the chart of India, January 26, 1950 at 10:18 a.m. That's the chart that's used for India generally. And one of the first things that I really notice right now that's been going on, particularly since Rahu went into Gemini in last year, is that there's been a lot of threats and things on the homeland. That includes things like the disturbances in Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and of course now with China. The fourth house is actually the homeland. It's literally the homeland. Excuse me. Sorry. 1 second. And feeling encroached upon in the homeland and defending the homeland. And since March of last year, when Rahu moved into Gemini, there's been quite a bit of, changing and having to really defend the homeland, so to speak. The reason that's important now is because we just had this eclipse cycle here with the sun going through the fourth house, being eclipsed by Rahu. And of course, Mercury retrograde is also there. And this, let me move this forward. So now we're here at July 1st. But this is also why we see, again, this like standoff with China. Again, because China has been sort of on their border. And when the border feels invaded, it's also like our home feels threatened. And so this Rahu in the fourth and the eclipse in the fourth house of the India chart is one of the reasons why this eclipse cycle really brought that standoff. This happened right before the eclipse, that escalation happened. And so there's one of the things I put it in the China, but the India and China are now at high level dialogue, and with a focus on finalizing modalities for the disengagement of the troops. So they're negotiating a peaceful settlement on this border with this border skirmish, which I think is going to be resolved. And perhaps even very soon, maybe in the next few days when we get near this full moon here and this eclipse in Sagittarius. Now that Jupiter has gone back into Sagittarius, a few things, these are general statements that I will make. Now that Jupiter has gone back into Sagittarius, it bodes well for restoring some common sense, some common purpose, some common vision throughout the world. It's going to be a pervasive theme, whether it's US, China, India. And for India, it's important because it's also the ruling planet. So Jupiter has just gone back into Sagittarius, and that is going to bode well for more diplomacy around the world. So the standoff with China and some of the things that have been happening there, I think will lessen this. One of the other things that's really been an issue is COVID has also reasserted itself in India quite a bit. And again, a lot of these things, again, can really be seen from the homeland and the pressures on the homeland. But even things like locust in Delhi, locusts are also related to Rahu. Insects are. And there's been this explosion of locusts in Delhi. Even things like the new Trump travel ban on H-1B visas, which affects people that are either from India but had been living in the U.S., and then they travel back and forth. People are getting stranded because of this travel ban. And again, so you can see just a lot of this pressure on the fourth house of the Indian chart. I say fourth house because India has the Pisces ascendant. And the fourth house is right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. The other important feature is, as you can see, Mars is in the first house of the Indian chart. Now, I think one of the things that's going on is, again, since Mars went into the first house of India's chart, of course, Mars is about fighting. I'm going to do a more extensive overview of India's chart. But again, Mars entered Pisces in the middle, like June 14th or something, I think it was, not that long ago, maybe 18th. And again, this is when the tension started, as soon as Mars went into the first house. And Mars is going to be in these two houses until early next year, either in the Lagna of India or going over India's moon. So this next year, or no, I should say this next 6 to 7 months at least, there's going to be quite a bit of tension in India. Maybe, again, this increased sort of militarization. So it's not surprising that we saw it happen right on the border as soon as it happened, as soon as Mars went in and we got close to this eclipse, we saw that border clash with China. But Mars is here through this year and into early next year, either in the Lagna or going over the moon of India into like February of next year. So in general, Jupiter going through the 10th house, or Jupiter going back into the 10th house and over India's Mercury, which is its 7th lord. The 7th house of any country chart is other nations and other countries that they have to deal with. And so again, this is one of the other reasons why there's been quite a bit of skirmishes and India really asserting its power and dominance over its homeland and pushing back enemies since like March of last year, especially because Ketu has been also going over this 10th house and over this retrograde Mercury in India's chart. Again, India rules the 4th and the 7th house, which is the homeland and other countries. So this is why India has been in such a defense of its borders since March of last year. There's been so much uprising, again, reestablishing power in Kashmir. I'm not going to get into who's right or wrong, so you can have a fight about it. I don't want to get into it. But also the border with China. One of the things is also, I wouldn't be surprised if, especially as we get into September, or as we get later, again, I'll do an update, but there isn't a renewed clash with Pakistan because Pakistan has a Aries ascendant. And when Mars goes into Aries, there could be some real tension with India and Pakistan for the rest of this year. Renewed border skirmishes with India and Pakistan. So again, if I run this chart, and you'll see that, just in a general sense as well, for the whole month of July, Venus is also going to be in Taurus. So that's going to be beneficial as well for all of us and bringing cooler heads to the table, especially with the things that we value and the people that we value and all of that. Again, that's universal, especially with the tensions in the U.S., with our social tensions. China, again, China just made a major crackdown in Hong Kong, which I'm going to be talking about. But amidst all of the things that have been happening, again, there's a lot of potential for, battles and fighting. We can definitely see some of it is going to be happening, but at least as it relates to hot wars, it bodes well that Jupiter is going back into Sagittarius, at least at this point. It's better than right on top of Saturn in Capricorn. And also that Venus is in Taurus, especially, because we're going to want to preserve some sort of connection. In the U.S. chart, it's also quite important because it's in the 7th house of the U.S. chart. I am using Scorpio as the U.S. chart now, but I did a video on that if you want to see it. But in general, the fact that Venus is in Taurus for the whole month bodes well for the whole world, really. The fact that Mars is in Pisces, again, in general, that's good for individuals to really pursue God and to find a deeper devotional state. But again, if you get it in a situation where it's in the 1st house of a country's chart, like with India, it's going to show some tension. So that's a specific detail. Saturn continues to go retrograde throughout the month in Capricorn. And so the way I see this in the chart of India, of course, is there's Venus, Jupiter, and the Sun in that 11th house. So again, the 11th house in the chart of a country is its international relations. Now, again, the 7th house is like the individual relations with other countries, but 11th house is like their place on the world stage, which is why India has a lot of grace on the world stage generally. It's a democracy. It treats its people. It's seen as a democratic republic. It's not seen as a warring nation. Saturn there, again, is actually for the next couple years, Saturn is going to really help to promote India in general as a powerful democracy. It's going to support its democratic acumen and in a positive way, especially as it also relates to wealth and those sorts of things. I think in general, it's a good time for India. Again, I'll talk more about that, but that's the overview. Now, if we go through, we can see each day we're going to have this lunar eclipse on July 4th. And again, I have a feeling that by the time we get through with this, China and India will have negotiated again, it's not a total peace because this area is contentious, but it's going to be a separation where the thing that's being talked about now is going to come to some resolution where they're backing down from the danger that it was a couple weeks ago. Because a couple weeks ago, it was very volatile and very dangerous. So between now and then, I think it'll be there, cooler heads will prevail and there'll be more diplomacy there. And I'm mainly looking for planets changing directions now and things like that, or changing signs. Now, Mercury goes direct on the 12th, on July 12th. Again, this is in the 4th house of India's chart, which has to do with the homeland. Hopefully, and I would think that maybe after July 12th, some of the COVID stuff will start to come down in India. They'll maybe start to get a better handle on that. Even things like the locusts and whatnot. Again, this Mercury retrograde in the 4th house of India's chart has not been so, beneficial really to anything. You could see all of this pressure on the homeland, right? Even people stranded in the homeland because of the visa situation. And this, I would say maybe after the 12th of July, maybe they'll start to ease some of the restrictions, and maybe people can start circulating a little bit more than, maybe not immediately, but especially as Mercury starts to move forward again, maybe gets out of Ardra Nakshatra and into Punarvasu, which is the end of July, like say July 26th. So those of you who are in India, watch and see if we get around around the end of July, 23rd, 24th, 25th, that you'll really start to see some things easing and things getting back to a more, to a less intense and fearful way. But in the meantime, there could be some real devastation, high death counts and things like that, like has been reported. But I don't think it's going to be as bad, especially once Mercury turns direct on July 12th. Now, we also have that the sun changes signs. The sun moves into the 5th house, July 16th. So again, you can see that the middle of the month, again, from India's chart, that's the 5th house, which has to do with creativity, being more creative. For a country, that's things like commerce and even like intellectual property rights and even things like movies and culture. So it could be a good time for, GDP and things like that, especially creative pursuits that India exports, things like yoga and things that are native to Indian culture. It could be a good time for Indian culture, sort of cultural exports at that time, and things that bring greater creativity to the people, but also to the country. So you can look at things that have to do with the 5th house in a country as even like celebrations and coronations and, times when the country is celebrated or the country celebrates things or is celebrated. But again, also, like I said, even things that are a sort of collective creative thing that the country does together. And again, that even includes things like spiritual practices and like the religion of the country. So after the 16th, when the sun goes into Cancer, it should be a good transit for, things should start to feel more uplifting at that time. Now, there's a new moon on the 19th. That's the 19th over here. Maybe it's the 20th in India. And that new moon in Cancer, like the 19th or 20th in India, should be, again, this is a start of a cycle of sort of rejuvenation. So it could be a good time for healing some of the difficulties. And again, as it relates to the things that have been happening here, hopefully some of the taking care of some of the sick and healing some of those difficulties, even things like the locusts and whatnot. I have a feeling, again, those kinds of difficult things affecting the homeland should abate after the 12th. But then by the time you get to like the 20th, it should be a sense of renewal and 5th house things, children coming together and whatnot. So those are some ideas I have about what you could perhaps expect in India. And again, right now, there's some difficult issues. A standoff with China, COVID reasserting itself. Just today or the last few days, India banned Chinese apps like TikTok and other things. Again, it's been turning into a sort of financial standoff and financial war. And by the way, even in regard to this, other countries, especially in Europe, I believe it was France or the EU, has recently come out and backed India in their sanctions against Chinese commerce. Again, this relates to India and what I said about India having Jupiter, Sun, and Venus in the 11th house, and generally having good standing with countries around the world as a peaceful country that is cooperative with its neighbors. You can see it in things like that, whereas China is definitely seen, at least in the world, as being more predatory, for example. So this is happening now. These are all things that are current. So I'm talking about how I see much of these things will start to turn around, and I gave a sort of timeline. This travel ban probably won't turn around, but maybe there'll be some allowances made to where even these visas will, again, I don't know enough about visas to know what would come to change that, but maybe there'll be some loosening of the restrictions that could come about. if we look, and I'll do the China chart next, and what's going on with China. Hang on a second. And again, I'm talking about these countries. They actually implicate other cultural issues as well. Like when I talk about the USA chart, I'm also going to be talking about a travel ban against the USA from the EU and other things like that, and China's relationship with the US and things like that. So with China, here's some things that have been happening. Hong Kong crackdown. They've just imposed life sentences for breaking the law in Hong Kong. This is a major, again, authoritarian move from China to really crack down in Hong Kong. There's a new swine flu that is reported out of China. It's now being said, oh, it's not going to be so bad. Yeah, okay. Well, we heard that before. Again, the tensions with India. And as I said here, both nations are currently, it says both nations held over 10-hour core commander level dialogue. The focus was on finalizing modalities for the disengagement of troops from various standoff points. So this was today that they're engaged in very high level talks. And again, where we're at right now is we're on June 30th. June 30th. What am I doing here? So we're on June 30th. Right now we're here. Yeah. And so, oh yeah, right. And so you can see as the moon gets closer to this new moon, it's showing where all of this intensity, because right around here is when you saw the China-India thing kind of blow up, right when we got near this eclipse. That's why it was so intense. And now as it gets near the full moon, gets near the lunation cycle, they're starting to come together and there's starting to be peace. The moon is getting fuller. It's like, let's cooperate. Let's not destroy each other. Right? So it's getting to be more cooperative. And then today, something else, America designates Chinese telecom companies, Huawei and ZTE, national security threats. There's all kinds of things going on with China right now with their technology and stresses in their technology. So you see the chart of China. This is cast for October 1st, 1949, 3:15 p.m. in Beijing. This is said to be, this is the chart that's generally used for China. I researched a few of them. One also from 1907, I think. This one seems to be the one that's mostly in use because I believe this was the establishment of the Chinese Communist Party and where it finally took power, something not exactly certain. I have to go back and research it more, but this is generally said to be, or this is generally the one that's used. It makes sense. Capricorn ascendant, Mars in the 7th house. China, Mars, and Pakistan. No, China, Mars. Both China and India have Mars in the 7th house. China has Mars in the 7th house. I'm sorry, India has Mars in the 7th house. China has Mars in the 7th house. I'm going to do a comparison of this pretty soon of these two charts, but right now, but we have, this is Capricorn, which you could see this in the nature of China as being Capricorn, authoritarian, shut down, closed. India is Pisces, which is much more open. Again, I'm going to talk more about that at some point, but we can see that this this cycle right now of Gemini is hitting China's chart in the 6th house. This is why a lot of tension right now with China. And again, this is in the backdrop of all of the heat that they've been catching, sort of increased heat around the world, at least the rhetoric coming from the United States as the China virus, or more and more blame as time goes on for how they managed or didn't manage, or fairly or unfairly, the COVID response and the transparency of it. But this cycle, again, this has been, Rahu has been in the 6th house of China. since March of last year. So you could see we had this virus that's made the world sick that came out of China. Rahu goes through the 6th house of China, right? And when the virus was first unleashed, at least it was known about and it was reported, was when we had the eclipse, the solar eclipse in the 12th house of China, but mainly the first reports of this deadly virus coming out of China happened on the lunar eclipse that was in China's 6th house. So these eclipses falling right on the 6th and 12th house axis of China shows why it, shows me that this is a good chart to be looking at least as far as a general chart of a Capricorn ascendant, and that it's a valid chart. You can see if you look at the dashas, they would have started Mercury dasha in end of 2019, and then Mercury Ketu, or I'm sorry, they would be in Mercury right now, and Mercury is actually the 6th house ruler. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit more at some point for sure. But anyway, as it stands, China is also having a Jupiter return in its 12th house. So again, this could really be shown, and also having a Saturn return, with Saturn going, not a Saturn return, but Saturn in its 1st house. And this is showing a pressure or a kind of reassertion of China's power. Again, this is a good transit for Saturn, for China. Because again, it's a Capricorn ascendant. Saturn goes into the 1st house. It's like, yep, here we are. Now, the last time it went into the 1st house would have been like 30 years ago in the early 90s. Be interesting to see. That would have been kind of right after Tiananmen Square and all of that, when China was putting together more of its economic, more economically sort of liberal, or allowing for some free enterprise and capitalism. I'm going to go back and do some research on this, but this is a powerful transit for China. They're feeling powerful. They're feeling empowered. Saturn is in the 1st house, and he's the ruler. And he's going over the moon, which is the 7th house ruler, which is the ruler of other countries, like I just said before. The 7th house ruler shows our relationship to other countries. And so, again, Saturn, the ruler, is going over and going through that 1st house now, which is, for a couple years, it's like we're feeling powerful. And powerful in a strategic way, in a Saturn way. You could definitely see China as a Saturnian country. Closed, but very strategic about everything. They've been setting up military bases in the South China Sea. They've been playing the chessboard with Hong Kong and Taiwan. I wouldn't be surprised if big moves started to happen, not maybe right at this moment, but by the time this transit is done in a couple of years, especially with Taiwan as well. But we'll stick to where we're at right now. And again, the same things apply. Like I said before, Jupiter going into Sagittarius is beneficial. Venus going through its own sign as well is also going to support some cooperation to some extent with China right now. Again, they're making a lot of authoritarian moves right now. So that's being dominated by Saturn in the 1st house. But in response, maybe it'll be a more gentle response within the population, or there will be an uprising, perhaps, with Venus going through Taurus, through that 5th house in the China chart for this month of July. Be interesting to see how that plays out, because this is a tricky thing to interpret, especially within the overall backdrop of China's chart. They're in Mercury dasha. It's in the 9th house, retrograde with Ketu in the Sun. This even shows that kind of communism as kind of like a religion. It's like this. That's that sort of nature. Hang on a second, please. So we're going to continue to see this tension, at least this combativeness going on in the China chart. Let me just start running the transits forward. So again, this new moon, this is in the 12th house. And again, that eclipse is going to be in the 12th house of China's chart. The 12th house for a country often has to do with hidden enemies. Maybe there will be some hidden enemy that they weren't expecting that comes and infiltrates what they were expecting. And again, it could even be something hidden like computer viruses, or even like this swine flu, this unexpected thing, or there could be a resurgence of some kind of hidden difficulty. I wouldn't expect it to be too serious, though, again, because Jupiter is also there. This could very much be showing that swine flu that they just discovered, and we have to be careful. Maybe this could be a new pathogen. As long, until Rahu gets out of this 6th house, China could be a place where there's sickness, there's conflict, there's confrontation. Again, we've seen coronavirus come out of China. We've seen them encroach on the border of India. We see them now cracking down in Hong Kong. This is major stuff, and it's all since Rahu has moved into its 6th house, and now with this eclipse. So again, the 12th house is opposite the 6th, where there's this hidden thing, like this dream state thing, this thing that we weren't paying attention to that can seep in. Maybe it's something beneficial that seeps into the consciousness. Maybe it's even like a hidden cure, even for COVID or something like that, that is something unexpected that's also beneficial because of Jupiter and the dignity of Jupiter going back into Sagittarius. Because we can expect wherever Jupiter is, there's going to be something beneficial. It could be beneficial. It's hard to say. I'm sorry to be so wishy-washy. It's also retrograding with Ketu. So, again, these things aren't always easy to interpret, but there's certainly an emphasis being placed on that area of life. And again, with retrograde, it can often cut both ways. Then you have Ketu there, which is a malefic, but then you have it's in its own sign. So there's 3 or 4 things, and they're all competing for saying good or bad with the result. So particularly when you're talking about the chart of a country, countries are so fluid, right? With an individual's chart, it's easier to interpret, right? With a country's chart, it could be so many things. So I'm going to move on because it's a little hard to be definitive about that. But at the very least, you can just watch something unexpected and something hidden to come about, especially as it relates to perhaps uprisings. This was my instinct, maybe like there could be some powerful uprisings, maybe in Hong Kong or somewhere, that makes them have to pull back, maybe some regulations or something like that. So then we keep going, and I'm going to look at kind of the same things. Mercury turning direct. Again, this is good because Mercury's been retrograde in the 6th house of China. Mercury going direct, again, shows maybe where we bring some healing into the conflicts. Again, China right now needs to chill out. I mean, they're encroaching on the border with India. They're cracking down on Hong Kong. Again, there's a new swine flu. Maybe they need to go take care of these things. And Mercury going direct, especially because it's also in Gemini, will perhaps show more attention put on handling their problems, managing these situations, de-escalating fully, and renegotiating, and perhaps rethinking some of the moves that they've been making lately. You can really see how these eclipses are really affecting China. Again, The last eclipse cycle that happened around Christmas, COVID was released out of China. This eclipse that just happened, again, the solar eclipse that happened 6 months later, China encroaches on the border with India. So these eclipses are really getting China very aggressive, a lot of aggressive moves. So perhaps Mercury going direct will bring more diplomacy, because it's also going to be, eventually aspecting this Jupiter here in Sagittarius, which is also, again, diplomacy, maybe some hidden channels. Maybe they'll even do some beneficial work with North Korea, or something like that. Some things behind the scenes. But anyway, as we go forward, the sun will go into the 7th house of China. Again, the 7th house has to do with other countries. And again, this could hopefully improve some international relations. Usually when the sun goes into a place, we put a lot of importance on that. And it's often we get pulled in that direction. And the 7th house is other people and a sense of diplomacy as well. I don't like to say things like a kind of Libra energy, but that's not too far off. And it's often because we have to take care of that thing that perhaps we weren't taking care of. And again, I would say perhaps something like this Hong Kong crackdown thing. Again, Hong Kong is not another country. It is another country, but it's a territory. But the sun going into the 7th house could show, and again, this is July 16th, could show some real diplomatic moves on the part of China as well to perhaps do something that's generous, let's say, for the world, so to speak. And so I see people talking about Pluto and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I generally just don't, I keep it simple and not interpret Pluto. I've interpreted it before. Pluto is right on this point right now. It is right on this point. And it's there for a while. It's been there for quite a while. So it's right in between Sagittarius and Capricorn, that's for sure. So this juncture between Sagittarius and Capricorn, which is the 12th and the 1st house of China, is definitely also a very volatile point right now, for sure. So let's hope that the sun going into the 7th house of China will also bring some authentic appeasement and some benefit to other countries. Again, they've been on a real aggressive stance for the last year, for sure. And particularly since Rahu moved into Ardra, and then even just out of Ardra into Mrigashira. So it was really when Rahu went through Ardra, and then this last eclipse, Rahu had just left Ardra and went into Mrigashira. You could see that. This is why I say that Rahu, that ascending part of the node, is really where most of the energy is brought forth. And so to understand that, even when we had the solar eclipse on the other end of the node, when we had the solar eclipse in December 25th, and the sun was eclipsed in Sagittarius by Ketu, it was 2 weeks later when the moon reached Rahu, and we had the lunar eclipse in the 6th house of China that COVID was now known to be an entity. So it still was on that. And again, 6th house is about illness. It's about conflict, battle, and also illness. Very, very obvious. And so the sun continues through the 7th house. And then let me go back to the new moon. We have the new moon on was it the 19th? Yeah, like the 19th or the 20th. Again, could be a time where that new moon in the 7th house of China, we could see, again, just maybe some real benefit come forth. It's just a reassertion of that transit. After the 20th, maybe we'll see again some diplomacy come forth out of China. And again, we might be surprised. We might even see something like, because China does more research on things like these flus than any other country. And I know You could say, yeah, it was even made up in a lab. Look, it could have been. We don't know for sure. But perhaps there could even be things like a vaccine or a cure or a treatment come out of China that gets shared with the world or something like that. It wouldn't surprise me, because this is also the nature of cancer. Maybe something like that. Now, again, one of the things is countries are also racing to find a cure so they can sell it to the rest of the world. So it's not purely altruistic, but maybe we'll see something like that with all the research that China does. But after the middle of July, hopefully we'll see some of these crackdowns and the tensions dialed back more. And again, maybe even some concessions made. These companies, what they wind up doing is, a lot of the Chinese technologies, including TikTok and some of these apps, they embed a lot of tracking and spyware on phones and stuff like that. And so they had been designated as security threats before, but then Trump took them off the security threat list. I don't want to get into all of that, but it looks like America just redesignated, especially Hawaii, or however you say it, as a security threat. So last but not least is the USA chart. And we got a lot going on here in the US. And we have, again, we're starting it here with, these are some of the things that are happening. Again, we have COVID re-explosion and tensions about it. Mask wearing is politicized. So if you see the curve in the rest of the world, they got the virus, then it came down, and then they flattened the curve. The U.S. went higher than everybody else, and it went like this, and now it's going again, right? Because we're America. Nobody's going to tell me to wear a mask. I'm my liberty, and it's a fake, and it's a scam, and it's this and that. So now even wearing masks has become a big political statement. Part of it, a big part of it, is also because, of course, the president feeds into that. And so there's just frankly been no coherent leadership. It's not a debatable point. It's just simply not happened. So you have all of these states the entire time have been run like little countries. But of course, it's still a big country. You can still fly all over the place. You can drive your car. And so we never did flatten the curve. We never did have strong leadership that just came out and said, okay, folks, here's what we have. We're going to, wear the mask. We're going to be smart. We're going to, handle this as a country, then we'll be back. We didn't have any central leadership. Not surprising. It would have been better if there had been nothing, but it was worse than no leadership. It was, let me now inject absolute chaos every step of the way. Not surprising. That's what it's been. So in the midst of that, not surprising, the U.S. has not flattened the curve or anything like that. So now we're at a point where not only have we not flattened the curve, it's blown up again. It could blow up exponentially even more. And now even things like mask wearing and whatnot is a big political statement that some people just don't want to do. There's just stuff, people going crazy. In the midst of that, we've also had racial tensions. Of course, this Black Lives Matter and these things were done all over the world, at least in the Western world, in Europe and Australia. Again, that could have contributed to some of it. We might as well just be sensible and say it obviously did contribute to some of it, but there's no real hard evidence that that's responsible for the explosiveness. We could have handled COVID more sensibly like the rest of the world, had those protests and seen some spikes, but not like what we have now, because the curve never did flatten. Travel ban now to EU based on this. So now, Trump especially comes into president and as president and starts wanting to ban travel to the U.S. or whatever. Well, now we're the ones that are banned because we're like a walking, virus. And it makes sense that the travel ban, especially to the EU, they've banned travel from the U.S. By the way, there's also, again, there's just some major scandals going on, especially with the president, this Russia bounty scandal. and the failure to manage the COVID has really, it's just made the president just really, his poll number, all of that, it's really, he's been very weakened. And again, this Russia scandal, if this is true, which it seems like it is, it hasn't been denied. What they've been saying is that he was never briefed or didn't know anything about it, but literally that Vladimir Putin was paying soldiers to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. Trump knew and hasn't done anything about it, which is like unbelievable. So these are things that are happening in domestic domestic politics. And so this is let's see here. Okay, so again, as I say, I use the USA chart, and you can see that I use Scorpio for the USA chart, and I did a video on that if you want to see why. I don't use Sagittarius, I use Scorpio. I'm going to do an update and talk even further about this, but one of the things that we're seeing is, again, now these same sort of, paradigms with these transits. First of all, again, we have Jupiter going back into this second house. Now, one of the things that, the second house has to do with the wealth, the money of the country. And again, having Ketu and Jupiter, especially Jupiter going retrograde back into that house of wealth is definitely showing where, again, our wealth and our values are retrograde, are reversing, are in the reverse right now. And we're, again, reevaluating, reflecting on our values. Jupiter is also the second house ruler, and going back into the second house. So again, it's a time to really reflect on our values, what we value the most. K2 has been sitting there since March of last year, end of March, excuse me. And this, really shows where our values have been focused upon and scrutinized and challenged. We've all been challenging our collective values, our personal values, what we say, what we speak, what we think. Again, in the context of this nodal transit. All these planets up here, you can see the US chart and the chart right now, and this Rahu. We're having this Rahu now go through the 8th house. So since March of last year, we've been in a 8th house transit. All these upheavals, all these changes, all this destruction of what was going on before, which is opposite the K2 in the second house. Again, this is how the axis works. K2 in the second house is saying, what are your values, America? What are your values, America? And Rahu going through the 8th house is saying, I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to blow it up and destroy it. And we're getting our whole kind of value system blown up and destroyed and reconstituted right now. And especially right now, because it's not only that Rahu is going through the 8th house, but we just had the eclipse there. And again, the eclipses are happening here. This is why, yes, folks, we're in an eclipse cycle. It's not always going to be like this, but yes, we are in a major eclipse cycle where all of these values, what we speak, how we express ourselves, again, even things like wearing a mask is a political statement. And that's second house as well. Statements are statements, particularly the face. The face is literally the body part. It literally works that way. And the body part of the face, and especially the mouth, is where we see our values. We can tell someone's values and what they value by what comes out of their mouth, what they speak. And literally, a lot of the big social statement around masks is, I'm free. You're not going to silence me. It's a way to silence us and all of that. So again, people don't want to do it. You see that K2 in the second house of the US chart. And all this change and transformation and destruction here with these planets going through the 8th house. So we're in that eclipse right now. It's an 8th house eclipse, and this again, it is a time of destruction and regeneration of our values. Again, we can see it everywhere, from the masks to the protests to, again, I'm not going to make it all about Trump because I don't really care that much, but you can see what he's doing in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of this. What he's doing is trying to foment racial tension. While all this stuff is going on, he just loves this issue of statues. He just loves it. I mean, he's losing the argument, though, because even all the Confederate states now they're taking down statues on their own. Alabama just got rid of the last state in the Union to not have the Confederate flag represented on their state flag. He's behind on the issues, but he uses it because he wants to use it to turn people against the protesters. He wants to have a wedge to rev people up. So again, even in that sense, the rhetoric is about our values, and he even says it, our values and our heritage. All of these buzzwords right now. This is the war that's happening right now, so to speak. I want to use the term war carefully, though. We're not at war, and war is war. War is bombs flying and bodies getting blown to bits, and we're not at war. And there's not major wars around the world right now, and that's a good thing, and we got to see it that way as well. Again, we can't conflate things and say, well, a culture war, it's just as bad. It's not just as bad. Don't act like it's just as bad, because it's not, okay? And that's important. It can get just as bad, but to say that it isn't the case, because again, we'll have these ideas get conflated really easily. So, but the soul or what we're going to become from where we've been is a big thing right now. Where we've been was as a country that stole the land from the natives, brought black people from Africa in boats, enslaved them for hundreds of years. Again, this is what's getting worked through right now. So that's a backdrop, and it's huge because of this Rahu Ketu in the 2nd and 8th house axis. And again, even people that agree with all that and agree that things need to be changed, many just don't have patience with it. I don't want to hear it, though. That's not moving things forward. That's fine. Everybody's voices are being heard around these things now, and we're kind of in the pressure cooker, seeing how we're going to work through it. But this is all 8th house stuff. This is why I see that it's a Scorpio country, not a Sagittarius country. And you see this eclipse, we're in this 8th house cycle right now. But we also have Venus going through the 7th. It's not always going to be going through the 7th. That's another point I want to make. We have some grace flowing now. It's going through the 7th house. Again, the 7th house in a country's chart is other countries, but it's also our citizens with each other and how we treat each other as citizens as well. So again, it's the government in relation to other governments, but it's also us in relation to each other. Just this week, we had this situation with protesters breaking through a private gated community, and the people came out with AK-47s and guns. We're getting close to some major stuff, and we got about a month to kind of rein some of this in. I'm going to say that right now. We got about a month to rein some of this in, because this Venus going through the 7th house is giving us a lot of grace. Imagine if all of this would have been happening with Venus not in Taurus. Venus is in Taurus right now, so we're being patient. Our patience is running out, though. We've been patient to stay home. We've been patient to do things, but our patience is running out, and it's not always going to be there. It's going to move into Gemini at the very beginning of August. And again, that's the 8th house, and it's going to join Rahu. So, but we're still going to benefit from this Venus going through the 7th house in July. We got to be patient, listen to each other, acknowledge, honor each other, not just back each other into corners, or things are going to start to get uglier for sure. So let me run the transits here. So this is July 2nd, July 3rd. We're going to have this eclipse, this lunar eclipse in this lunar eclipse will be in the second house again. And so this is also Guru Purnima, like I've said before, and it's this lunar eclipse in the second house where, again, this is a great opportunity for us to listen to each other. Listen. And everybody take a breath, man, especially spiritual people. Tone it down. Have some tolerance for people that are freaking out or tweaked a little bit. Tone it down. None of us know what's going on. Again, no matter how much you think you understand the conspiracy or the this, or it's Obama, it's Trump, it's this, it's that, it's just tone it down. Like, regardless, we're all still human beings, and we don't know for sure. We're all a little worried. We're all a little fearful. Everything is changing, and we don't really know what's coming next. We don't need to be so aggressive with each other. And again, you know, the start of the month has a good tone for the world with this, you know, the moon's debilitated, but it's opposite Venus, which brings a lot of potential to listen, to heal each other, to be patient, even though we're being triggered, to feel the other person as the divine as well. I mean, no matter what people are doing, you know, everybody's trying to do their best. We're all, in some ways, like frightened animals trying to survive, you know? So this isn't just preaching. This is also because we have this lunar eclipse in Sagittarius with Jupiter, with Ketu. So again, and it's the Guru Purnima. So it's a time to be inspired by higher teachings, higher wisdom. Even if that's, you know, even if you're a Christian or whatever your religion is, there's no religion or no higher teaching that teaches you to hate, to divide, to destroy everybody that you disagree with. So July 4th and that cycle, and in fact, even the transit of Jupiter back into the second house between now and back into Sagittarius between now and November will be beneficial for hopefully restoring some of this common sense and some of this, you know, greater honoring of everyone's values. Jupiter left Sagittarius at the end of March. So since the end of March, Jupiter has been in Capricorn. Again, it's been close to Pluto and Saturn. So think of how much things have changed since the end of March. Of course, this was right when we were just starting to get hammered with COVID. But look at what's happened since then. We've been up and down with that. We've had the Black Lives thing. We've gone through all these other cultural issues now. It's now a matter of masks and conspiracies, and all things have blown up since the end of March. So Jupiter going back into Sagittarius can unwind a lot of that, put it back into a place where, again, it's not just in the US, it's for the whole world. But it can put things in a context that's more spacious, where we can put into practice our beliefs and be be more tolerant and spacious with each other. So then we go forward, and again, I'm just going to look at the things I looked at before. We have this Mercury going direct July 12th, right? And again, so Mercury going direct in the 8th house. It's been backwards in the 8th house, again, sort of unwinding a lot of our fears and paranoia and things like that. So Mercury moving direct in the 8th house after July 12th is really a time, again, to start actually changing and making some healthy adjustments to each other. Maybe we'll start to see some things like laws enacted. They've been trying to pass some laws, especially that were policing laws. And frankly, I think the Democrats, there was a law that was proposed. It didn't go far enough, ultimately, quote, so to speak, and I agree with that. It could have gone further, but there were some things in that law, that the proposed bill that the Republicans put forth. I did see it, and the Democrats rejected because it didn't go far enough. It might just be negotiating, which is good. But I think there's a real possibility of getting some meaty legislation that actually starts to reallocate resources to the police, ban chokeholds. I mean, there was part of it that wanted to ban lynching. Lynching is still not illegal. I mean, what does that tell you? We should absolutely have a law that bans lynching. So, again, without getting into all of that, but again, Sagittarius and Gemini, this is where things like laws and actual ideas become the law. Especially Jupiter is very much related to the law, Sagittarius. Of course, it's God-made law or man-made law. It's our vision together. So I wouldn't be surprised if after, let's say, middle of July, perhaps when Mercury starts going direct, they work out some kind of actual, maybe some legislation to address these things that we're going through. And, the other thing that needs to happen is some of the protesting needs to be toned down. Too much of the protesting is again, I understand. I think everyone understands. It doesn't mean it has to stop. I don't think it needs to stop. But I think, for example, the couple that busted into the gated community, I don't know what I would have thought if people busted into a gated community, because if you live in a gated community, you're not used to this kind of thing. And then raucous making noise, and not just making noise, but all kinds of, it could be scary. I'm not saying people should have brought guns out, machine guns, AK-47s and whatnot. Again, I just try to observe things with neutrality. I'm not judging people right or wrong in this regard, but we can't just keep acting like any kind of mayhem and anarchy is going to be accepted or acceptable forever. There has to be a point where protests start to die down and become real substantive legislation, which looks like things that are happening now. They have, and stay with the movement, though. Don't just give it up. And I don't think it's going to be given up. So these are the kinds of things sort of pivoting from the explosiveness of the eclipse in the 8th house to the eclipse cycle closing and Mercury moving forward in the 8th house, where we start to realize, okay, we don't need to just burn the thing down. There's progress being made and things start to move forward sensibly after July 12th, when Mercury turns direct. And then the sun goes into Cancer. Now, this is the 9th house of the U.S. chart. And again, I see this as a time that could certainly be, again, beneficial. The 9th house is the most auspicious house in the chart. One second, take a drink here. And it shows a common, in a country's chart, the 9th house shows the common, the common citizenship, like, patriotism, or the common thing, like the beliefs that you share together as a country. And again, we're very fractious right now. It's hard to find what is the common thing that we all have. At the very least, it's that we all want to live together somehow. So finding that place of healing amidst very divisive leadership, very divisive, technologies and disruptive technologies and short attention span and the post-factual world and all of the stuff that we're trying to navigate in order to find common ground is a challenge. But the sun going into the 9th house of the U.S. chart after the 16th, I think will definitely bring some real benefit, perhaps with the law, perhaps with some laws, again, because the 9th house is also the laws of the country. And again, it's the laws and the Constitution and the institutions that define the common culture, like the religion of the country. I don't like to use the word religion, but that's what 9th house is. It's the beliefs that hold us together. In the U.S., whether we want to think of it or not, we have a set of beliefs. My liberty, my freedom to worship, my freedom, self-expression, First Amendment, all that stuff that we say that makes America America, that's all 9th house stuff. So the transit of the sun through the 9th house, and again, these things are an aggregate of laws and agreements that we have, could really make a could really show some change. I wouldn't be surprised if in this next month, We do see perhaps some major police legislation. Again, there was already proposed legislation, which in and of itself, you have to stop and think about how transformative that is. That's a big thing. It was mostly partisan, but there were many Republicans that came over to also support it. In the House and in the Senate, they had their own version of it. They realized, for whatever reason, politics or whatever the reason, I don't want to be cynical, but that this change has to happen. The people always have the power. The people have the power because they have the numbers. And so again, this 8th and 9th house, this is how the 8th house becomes the 9th house. And in the US chart, it's the 8th house of destruction, change, transformation based on our fears, vulnerabilities, feeling of being abused, feeling of being mistreated. All that 8th house stuff leads to a higher purpose, a higher teaching, which is the 9th house. So that's the shift that's happening right now as the sun moves from the 8th house and this eclipse cycle moves from the 8th house of the US chart to the 9th house. And again, that new moon that happens on the 20th, especially from July 20th after, I think we could really see more healing that's possible. Now, again, I don't live in a Pollyannish world. I think there can be all kinds of divisiveness in the midst of it. And we have to realize, though, some of the things that I said, because we also tend to make things worse than they are. And I already said it before, but we're not at war. We're not at war. We're not firing bombs at each other. We're not having a civil war. And we're very far away from it. We're not far away from tensions escalating, like I said, but there's not a civil war. We have seen real change with, I mean, it's not something that's going to change the whole world or the whole country, but again, these states and these municipalities agreeing to like bring down statues, change flags, enact laws. What do we expect? This is how the system works. This is what we have. It's not the end of anything. It's just the beginning. But we have to be able to also acknowledge progress and not just be cynical about everything. I'm not cynical at all, by the way, about any of it. I think it's a huge time. I'm actually like, wow, this is great. Again, it's hard to see the unrest. The thing that makes me more stressed than anything is the silos and the extremism that everyone is in, particularly as it relates to things like not wearing a mask and keeping COVID going forever because of these. To me, we're just fighting a bunch of rhetorical battles that ultimately is just hurting the country. It's hurting the country's standing in the world. And we're seeing that. Travel ban to the EU, we're just losing standing because people are like, what are these guys doing? The whole rest of the civilized world knew what to do and they did it. And we can't. And so hopefully some of this change and transformation also will enact in that regard as well. And we'll start to see our own collective consciousness with each other that wearing a mask is kind of like wearing a seatbelt. You know, it's like, it's not your whole liberty isn't on the line. You know, it's not like you're being told to, you know, and again, then I know there are people that say it creates the virus. I don't want to get into it. Really, I don't. But these are the things that to me are more insidious than the social changes that we're seeing. The social changes that we're seeing, I think, are needed for sure. That's my view. And I think things are on the ascent, but we're in difficult times because we're battling over our values. And I know there are people that don't want it. And I know that's a big part of the values as well. So again, all of these other things too, like with the Russia scandal, like with the Trump and all of this, these scandals and stuff. Again, this is also 8th house stuff. This is all 8th house. We're seeing this underbelly. And again, in this last eclipse cycle, we've seen so much come out, especially since the protests started and whatnot. And Trump came out and talked about the military, using them to beat back protesters. And then all the like generals and one that came out and said, no, you're not. No, there's been so much pushing back against Trump, that also we just can't ignore. And, him having rallies with, and not being successful, just a lot of failures. So, these things, again, we're going to, I think, come together around a more common, higher vibration instead of pinning all of our hopes on these ideas that it's this guy's going to save us, or this is that, or this is that, and hopefully start to see things with more objectivity. That's my hope, at least. I've talked a lot here and gone through quite a bit of stuff here, and looks like people have been having some conversations, and I hope they've been fruitful for you. So if this was helpful, share it with others. And again, I hope I covered the material reasonably well and gave a pretty good idea of how things are going. It's quite a lot. Before I did this, I was like, what am I about to do here? I'm about to talk about the country of 3 countries, their charts, the transits over the next month. Again, I do my best. So I hope this was maybe helpful to align with a lot of the energies that are happening in the world now. And again, if you think this was helpful, I appreciate you sharing it with others and liking the video and whatnot too. So anyway, you all take care.